What's going on, guys, in the works? And due to popular demand, today we are going to be looking at the ACOG scope. Now, a lot of you guys wanted me to punish myself when I did my beta, my beta style UMP video, to go in and look at the ACOG scope. Because back when the game was first released, during the beta, everybody used the ACOG because it was the first optical attachment that you actually unlocked. So you saw a lot of people using it. But nowadays, you don't see a ton of people using the ACOG. It's just not practical on some maps, and it's a little bit more difficult to use because you do get a slight, artificial feeling of recoil. And that's just because the higher up you go in a zoom, it just feels like it's jumping a little bit more. And that's mostly placebo, but it does exist, and it makes it a little bit more difficult to use. But what it does give you is a little bit more accuracy at range. You do get to put your shots on target a little bit more precisely, I guess you could say, because you have a better idea of where they're going to be landing once you get a feel of how the ACOG works. Now, in this video, we're going to look at the three different classes: Assault, Engineer, and Support with ACOG scopes. Now, I'm going to skip Recon because I think that's kind of cheating, because I think that Recon can be successful with the ACOG is actually a pretty practical option, and I've used it quite a bit. So we'll skip Recon because, a lot of Recon weapons are either single shot or semi-auto, and I think that really, they can really benefit from having an ACOG scope on it. But, we're starting here with the M4, which is probably the best engineer weapon. I think it's the typical, when you first got Battlefield 3 beta and you were playing the engineer, you probably at some point used the M4 with an ACOG scope. And honestly, it's not really that good. You really just hurt yourself in my eyes, because you don't really want to be trying to go long range with a weapon like the M4. I mean, it does do 25 damage and drops off to the normal, engineer damage model, but it's not really a long range weapon. So I don't really think it benefits that much as opposed to like an AN94. It benefits a lot from having an ACOG scope. But if you look at like the M249 with an ACOG scope, this is actually kind of interesting, because a lot of people actually like using the the 3, the 4 times zoom scopes while bipoding up with the M249 with the 240 Bravo, and it's pretty practical. It actually makes a lot of sense to use it like that. I think out of all these kits you're going to see, I think the LMG actually probably benefits most heavily from having an ACOG scope, because you can stay on target. If you're bipoded down, you're going to be reducing a lot of that, like I talked about, the artificial recoil that you feel when using the ACOG scope. You're not going to have a lot of bounce, and you're going to get the benefit of having a higher zoom scope. So I definitely see the LMG as being a very logical option if you're going to be bipoding a lot. Now, if you're going to be firing from the hip, if you're going to be firing from the shoulder, yeah, maybe not. Maybe you might want to think about choosing a different weapon. But I think that if you're thinking about, holding down a corridor, a lot of times a scope like the ACOG or even the 3.4 times zoom scope can do a lot of work. So I was actually a little bit surprised with the results I got from the M249. I tried it with the M240 Bravo as well. They both worked pretty well. I think that the belt feds work better. I don't really see them being that practical on a weapon like the L86 A2. I almost called it the L85. And then what's the other one? The M227. I don't really think it makes a whole lot of sense on the M27. But any of these high capacity, belt fed LMGs that you're going to hold down an area with, by all means, try out the ACOG. Now, let's move into what everyone's been waiting for: the Assault kit with the ACOG M16, because you guys know, you're probably like, oh, Jake's going to use the M16. Well, you're right, I am using the M16, except I'm using the M16 A4. I figured I could not make a video with the A3, so I had to troll you guys a little bit, and I'm using the A4. And it's actually a pretty practical option because it is a burst fire. It's one of the most accurate assault rifles behind maybe the AN94. I think this thing is interesting. It actually adds a new dynamic to it. Now, you're going to be reaching out a little bit further, at least in my eyes, with the M16A4. The point is to stay back a little bit. You don't want to be super aggro, with it like you would be with maybe like the M16A3, because it's a more of a precision weapon, and precision weapons benefit from a scope like the ACOG. So, my overall opinion on the ACOG scope: I don't like it. I'm going to be honest with you guys. I probably spent about 5-6 hours just getting footage for this video, making sure that I had, a couple fails, a couple wins in it at some point. And the ACOG scope just doesn't do it for me. I'm just not a huge fan of higher zoom scopes on assault rifles. Now, like I said, I think if I had to choose the ACOG for a class, I would relegate it towards like, a bipod LMG. I wouldn't really like it that much on like an assault rifle. Like I mentioned though, the AN94, I have used it on that quite a bit. I use the AN94 a lot, so I've tried it with almost every different optical attachment, and I think it does a pretty good job like that. I think the AN94, since it is a precision weapon, it does a pretty good job. But then like the M16A3, I would almost rather just, you know, run the Cobra sight like everybody else in the world does. With the A4, you maybe get a slight bonus. So it's really going to come down to preference. I know a lot of scopes are preference, and the ACOG is no exception. I mean, it doesn't really pose that big of a tactical advantage in my eyes. So that's just my opinion on it. I'm actually kind of curious. How many of you guys use the ACOG out there? Because I don't see a ton of people running around with it these days. But if you missed my past videos, here's a chance to catch up. Hopefully you did enjoy this painful look at the ACOG. I know it was a little bit shorter than my normal videos, but I was struggling to force myself to play with it. But I will see you guys next time. Peace.